The porch light flickered above us as I adjusted the last grocery bag in my arms, watching Luca lift 2 more without effort, his sleeves rolled up, forearms tanned and strong from long hours renovating the guest unit. And when he turned to flash that easy smile, something inside me pulled taut like a wire stretched too far. He said something about how I always overbuy when there's a sale, and I laughed too high too quickly just to fill the air before my silence gave me away. At the door, I fumbled for the keys, our hands brushed, and I turned to thank him, but the words got caught behind a sudden heat rushing up my chest, and before I could stop myself, I leaned forward and kissed him. Not on the cheek, not soft or sisterly, but on the mouth, slow and full as if I had every right. His lips didn't move at first, stunned maybe or cautious, but then just barely, just enough. He kissed me back and time stilled for a heartbeat so loud I swore it would crack the air open. Then the front door creaked and opened fast, my husband's voice cutting through with a casual, "Need a hand out there?" And Lucas sprang back, knocking his elbow against the doorframe, mumbling something about being clumsy while I laughed too hard and pointed at a bag like it was the punchline to a joke. Inside, I dropped the eggs, couldn't meet my husband's eyes, and tried to ignore the way my fingers trembled against the kitchen counter. I didn't know why I'd done it, what impulse had gripped me, but my body remembered the shape of Luca's mouth like it was a secret it had been waiting to tell. And he wasn't a guest anymore. He lived downstairs. My husband poured his coffee like always, asked about my sleep and kissed my cheek with the same practiced rhythm, but something in his eyes felt cooler, like a curtain drawn halfway across a window, not accusing, not even curious, just absent in a way I couldn't name. I moved through the morning pretending not to notice, though every glance he avoided landed like a stone in my gut, and I started to wonder if silence had always felt this loud. Luca lingered in the kitchen longer than usual, watching me slice fruit like I was performing a magic trick, asking offhand if I ever wished I lived somewhere else, somewhere warmer, somewhere quieter, like a life could be swapped with a postcard. I didn't answer, just kept cutting, though my hands moved slower than they should have, and when he smiled it wasn't boyish or playful. It was the kind of smile you give someone who's already said too much. That evening, wrapped in a towel, I pushed open the bathroom door assuming I was alone, and there he was, close, shirt damp from steam, mouth parted slightly like he'd been about to speak. We didn't move. The air between us thickened and he didn't step back. "You looked lost," he said finally, voice low. "I just gave it a name." He said it casually over breakfast like it was nothing. "Thought we could drive up to the cabin today, just the 3 of us, get out of the house for a bit." And I nodded before I could think, my spoon hovering midair, Luca standing behind me at the sink, silent, his eyes unreadable in the morning light. The drive was long and quiet, the kind of quiet where every cough feels intrusive. The radio stayed off, and the wind through the windows filled the space we didn't dare speak into. My husband focused on the road, Luca staring out at trees like they had answers, and me gripping my knees too tightly. The cabin was cold when we arrived, musty with the kind of stillness only old wood remembers, and while my husband searched for the breaker box, muttering about mice and bad wiring, Luca and I unpacked silently, our hands brushing over the same set of plates. A flicker of heat passed like a secret too fast to name. During dinner, his fingers grazed mine when I passed the salt, and I didn't pull away, didn't even flinch, just let it sit there like something honest in a room full of small talk. Later, the bathroom mirror fogged as I stepped out of the shower, towel wrapped high, and the door eased open without a knock. Luca standing there, eyes locked on mine, breath shallow, and before I could speak, his hands found my waist and his mouth met mine. Not hesitant this time, not searching, just certain. When we drove back the next day, the trees seemed sharper, the road narrower, and my husband glanced at me once, long enough to ask without asking, then said, "You really don't see the way he looks at you, do you?" And I lied with a shrug. I spent the next morning scrubbing baseboards like they'd done something wrong, letting my hands turn raw from bleach and repetition, pretending if I made the house shine bright enough, everything inside it would feel clean again. And when I called my husband for dinner that evening, I found him already eating alone in his office. The door cracked just enough to see the glow of his laptop and the fork pausing midair as he said, "I've got calls." Not unkind, just distant in that way he'd perfected. I ate quietly at the table, listening to the soft tick of the wall clock, noticing for the first time that it was behind by 10 minutes, like it had been trying to warn me and I hadn't listened, and as I rinsed the plates, I saw the note folded on the edge of the counter, tucked beneath a dish towel I hadn't moved since morning. Today, 5:40 p.m. Don't come unless you're ready to change everything. My hands trembled as I turned the paper over, as if some part of me hoped for an answer on the other side. But there was nothing. Just those words, written in Luca's unmistakable print, clean and direct. I waited exactly 20 minutes before walking to the detached workshop behind the house. A place that once stored tools but now stood hollow, filled only with dust and possibility. Luca didn't speak when I entered, just looked at me like silence could reach deeper than language, and I stood still waiting for him to move, to explain, to touch, but he didn't. He just stood there, breathing like it hurt, and in that heavy pause between us, I realized the absence of touch could echo louder than anything physical. We left through separate doors, but everything had shifted, like time had cracked slightly open. I told him it was a short conference just 2 hours outside the city, nothing fancy, a gathering of old colleagues I hadn't seen in years. And when he asked if I needed company, I smiled too quickly and said I'd be fine, that it would be boring anyway, slides and speeches and lukewarm coffee, and he nodded, half listening, already turning back to his phone while I packed a small bag with a few pieces of clothing I hadn't worn in months and a bottle of perfume I hadn't touched since the holidays, the one he used to compliment and then stopped noticing entirely. I texted Luca the time and address with shaking fingers, part of me hoping he wouldn't show, another part terrified he wouldn't take it seriously, and when I stepped into the hotel lobby later that afternoon, I found him already there, leaning against the reception desk with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and that same unreadable look he always wore when he was about to cross a line he couldn't uncross. We didn't speak much as we rode the elevator, the silence between us charged like a live wire, and when the door closed behind us in the room, the air felt heavier than it should have, not from tension but from truth. Like both of us knew exactly why we were there but weren't sure what we were capable of doing with that knowledge. The window overlooked the highway, headlights blinking like Morse code in the fading light, and for a while we just sat drinking room service wine and talking about everything except us, about music and movies and why hotel towels always smelled like paper, and then he looked at me the way he had that night in the bathroom, still intense, like he was memorizing something he knew he wasn't supposed to keep. And when he kissed me, it wasn't a question or a test, it was a moment that had been waiting for itself. My hands tangled in his shirt, his breath shook against my cheek, and we moved with the kind of careful urgency that doesn't belong to strangers. But when I reached for the edge of his sweater, he stopped me gently, forehead resting against mine as he whispered, "Not yet, not like this." And for once I didn't feel rejected, I felt seen, held together by the pause instead of the push. We fell asleep tangled in silence, fully clothed, the sheets barely disturbed, but my dreams were louder than any touch could have been. In the morning the sun came too soon, casting sharp shadows across the room, and I dressed quickly while he showered, folding everything with precision like I could pack the feeling away too. I didn't notice the receipt until I got home, stuffed deep in the pocket of my coat, creased and damp with the scent of stale perfume and hotel soap. And I froze when I touched it, not out of fear but out of realization that it existed in the world now, proof of something I had tried to keep only inside me. My husband found it 2 days later while hanging my coat on the back of a chair, and he didn't say anything at first, just turned it over, read it slowly and set it down like it meant nothing at all. That night, he kissed me on the forehead before bed, same as always, and I lay awake with the weight of a truth neither of us had spoken, but both of us now knew. I stared at the ceiling, trying to breathe like I used to, but my chest felt tight, not with guilt, but with the haunting clarity that this life I'd lived for years no longer belonged entirely to me. My husband started asking questions he never used to ask, like what time I'd be home or who I was texting, but always with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and when I answered I could feel his silence stretching out behind the words, measuring every pause like a scale looking for imbalance. He started coming home early from work without warning, showing up in the kitchen while I cooked, watching me just a second too long, then pretending he'd forgotten why he came in, and it wasn't anger I felt. It was calculation, quiet and careful, like he already knew but needed me to say it. One evening he brought home an old family friend, someone I hadn't seen in years, a therapist with kind eyes and a soft voice who asked about my stress levels and whether I'd considered meditation, and I smiled and answered politely while feeling my heart beat behind my teeth, knowing full well I was being analyzed over salad. Luca stopped speaking to me altogether, his footsteps lighter, his door always closed, and when I passed him in the hall, he looked through me like I wasn't there, until one afternoon I found a message slipped into a cookbook I hadn't touched in months. A photograph of me at the window, my face turned slightly away, soft and unguarded, and scrawled beneath it in pencil, "You were beautiful even in silence." I stared at it so long my tea went cold, And that night my husband stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms folded, watching me fold laundry I wasn't really folding, and without raising his voice, without blinking, he said, "Is he more than just a tenant to you?" And though I opened my mouth to answer, nothing came out. I used to feel like a woman in this house, not just someone who cooked and folded and waited for someone else's day to end, but someone seen, wanted, touched, like she mattered. And somewhere along the way that faded, slowly enough I didn't notice until silence felt normal and soft clothes replaced lace without question. That night, the sky was heavy with rain that never fell, and I sat curled on the couch with the TV on low, a glass of wine untouched beside me, the air too still and my heart louder than it should have been, when Luca knocked softly and stepped in without waiting, holding nothing, saying nothing, just looking at me like everything that needed to be said already had been. I stood slowly, unsure if I was trembling or just tired of standing still, and when I walked toward him I didn't feel guilt or fear, only that raw, urgent need to feel alive again. And when he kissed me, it wasn't hesitant or careful, it was the kind of kiss that breaks something, the kind that's never really about the body. We didn't speak, didn't make promises, didn't pretend it meant forever. It was a moment, full and dangerous, and ours. Morning came like a slap, harsh and indifferent, the room brighter than it should have been, and we lay in the after, quiet and unsure, until I pulled on my sweater without looking at him, and he didn't try to stop me, just watched me walk toward the door with something between longing and surrender in his eyes. I didn't want to leave, not really, but I did. And when I got home, my husband was already back, early from his trip, standing in the bedroom, frozen, his nose lifting slightly as if trying to place a scent he'd never known before. He stood on the porch with a suitcase in one hand and his car keys dangling from the other, soaked from the drizzle but not shivering, eyes locked on mine like he'd already made peace with whatever came next. And when I opened the door, he didn't wait for an invitation, just said, "I've got enough cash for a start, a full tank, and one stupid, stubborn hope. Come with me." My breath caught, not from shock but from how real the moment felt, like something from a dream I hadn't allowed myself to finish. And I looked at the suitcase, then at his face, trying to imagine what the first hour would feel like. Two people alone in a car, driving into nothing, carrying everything. I didn't answer. Instead, I asked myself questions that didn't help. Where would we go? How long could it last? Who would I be without the version of me I'd spent half my life building? And somewhere in that silence, my phone buzzed on the counter. I picked it up without thinking, saw my husband's name, and below it just 3 words. "I know. Come home." The weight of those words pressed against my chest like wet cloth, and when I looked up, Luca was watching me with that same quiet ache, the one that says, "Don't lie, not even now." I opened my mouth, then closed it again, the answer stuck between guilt and longing, and he nodded slowly like he already understood. "Take care of yourself," he said, voice low, and he walked down the steps without looking back. I stood frozen in the doorway until his car disappeared past the trees, and for the first time in weeks I felt nothing. Not regret, not relief, just a hollow stillness where something used to be. He didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't ask questions he didn't want answers to. He just came home that evening with a brochure in his hand and a tired kind of softness in his voice, saying, "Let's start fresh, maybe Tuscany, you've always wanted to go," like a vacation could patch over the cracks we'd both been stepping around for years. And I nodded slowly, heart heavy, lips curved into something that looked like a yes but meant I need more time to remember who I am. I told him I wasn't ready yet, not for plane tickets or smiling photos or pretending the worst thing we'd done was forget an anniversary. And he said he understood, that he'd wait, that we could fix this if we both wanted to. But all I could think about was Luca's eyes at the edge of the porch and the quiet way he said goodbye, like he was letting go of something he never thought he'd touch. Days passed in that strange suspended way time moves when nothing happens but everything still changes, and then one morning I found it. An envelope without a return address, slid through the mail slot, the handwriting unmistakable in its simplicity. Inside was a single postcard, the image a black and white photo of an open road, and on the back just 8 words. "You were not a mistake. You were freedom." My fingers trembled as I read it again and again, breath catching somewhere between memory and ache. And though I wanted to scream or cry or run after him, I did none of that. I tore the postcard in 2 hands, shaking, but I didn't throw it away. I taped it back together carefully and placed it under the glass of the side table in my bedroom, where no one else would notice. But I'd always know it was there, the proof that someone somewhere once saw me not as a wife or a mistake, but as something wild and untamed and worth choosing. That night, as my husband poured wine and talked about rental villas and rolling hills, I smiled and nodded and folded my napkin slowly, while my heart beat to the rhythm of a name I couldn't say out loud anymore. He packed the old cooler with strawberries and sandwiches, brought the same faded blanket we used when we were young, and smiled like this was a sweet surprise, not a lifeline tossed into silence, and I went along with it, folding napkins, pouring lemonade, pretending that normal could still be enough. We drove past the city limits to the same field we used to visit before life got small and tired. And as he spread the blanket and pointed at clouds like shapes we could still name together, I looked at him and felt the familiar tug of guilt twisted with gratitude, because he really was trying. He laughed at his own joke about how the thermos still leaks just like old times, and for a moment I watched the sun light up his face and thought maybe it could have been different if we'd noticed the cracks before they broke us, but deep down I already knew. I had gone somewhere else and I didn't know how to come back. I smiled at the right moments, held his hand when he reached for mine, but I felt like a ghost in my own life, hovering at the edge of something that didn't belong to me anymore. When we got home, he kissed my temple and asked if I wanted to watch a movie, and I nodded, though my chest felt hollow and still. That night, after he fell asleep, I stood in the hallway in the dark, barefoot and awake, not thinking of Luca or Tuscany or promises, just breathing in the truth I could no longer bury. I wasn't choosing between two men. I was choosing not to disappear anymore. I whispered to no one, I chose myself, and in that quiet, terrifying moment I knew, this time I had to live with it.